What's going on, everyone? Taylor Kyles here for CLNS Media, coming at you with another episode of Pat's Daily, brought to you by our good friends at PrizePicks and Game Time. Got another mailbag episode for you, and today we are joined by one of the friends of the podcast, Doug Kyed of the Boston Herald. Doug, how you doing, buddy? Welcome back to the show.
Doing all right. It's very hot here in southeastern Massachusetts, so I think we're all getting reacclimated to that. But otherwise, I'm doing just fine. How are you guys doing?
The heat stinks. I'm with you. I got ACs went in this morning. I woke up. I put them in. I was sweating my butt off. It's tough. It's good because, you get into summer weather and everything. It's fun. Training camp's around the corner, but the start of it's tough. The adjustment from no ACs to ACs isn't a fun one. But other than that, I'm good.
Yeah, before the show, Doug and I literally checked in with each other. Like, can you hear my fan? I can't hear yours. Like, oh, we're good? Because it's just...
I didn't do that, and I have an AC behind me. Am I good? You're
good.
Fine?
I think
let's
good.
go in the comments if you can hear anything, because we're pretty good on our end, but we shall see.
All right, mind. We might have a slight hum, but I think we're good. People are understanding of it.
All right.
Content will be louder, and the info will be louder than whatever we're doing to keep ourselves from sweating over here. All right, fellas, before we get into the mailbag, obviously we had the first session of OTAs today, so general thoughts on what we saw, some impressions. Obviously, there's not a ton we can genuinely take away in terms of like long-term outlook, but I feel like there were some players in different spots. We got to see Drake May with the veterans and Joe Milton, so we kind of got to see different types of arm strength and everything. I'll start with you, Doug. What were some of your big takeaways?
Yeah, I think number one was just the quarterback order, that it was Jacoby Brissett, then Bailey Zappi, then Drake May, then Joe Milton. I know there's probably going to be a lot made out of that, but for me personally, I was expecting it to go Jacoby Brissett, then Drake May. So Bailey Zappi taking reps in the middle of them was somewhat surprising to me. And then the other big takeaway for me was just the offensive line combinations as well. I expected, Chukes Okorafor to be at left tackle, but we saw that with our own eyes out there. And then just the two starting guards, being City Sal at left guard, Nick Leverett at right guard. We have a little bit more context on that now that we know that Cole Strange, expected to miss the start of the season, could be out until midseason. So, with City Sal, he played, relatively well at right guard last year. But in college, he spent most of his time at left guard. So it's not ultimately that surprising that, if they think that someone's going to have to play left guard for a while, City Sal might be the best option in the interim while Cole Strange is out.
Mike,
I wasn't there. Full disclosure, I was in Florida already getting ready for the heat, but I came back, and at least from the outside looking in, it is the offensive line. That's the main takeaway. Those the offensive line combinations, and again, Doug, like you mentioned, getting more clarity on why we saw it like that, and with Cole Strange not being out there. And I will say too, it's I forget where I heard it or where I read it or something, but the fact that and again, they don't really have a true left tackle right now on the roster, at least, starting caliber. And so you're going to have to get Chukes Okorafor ready. You're going to have to get Caden Wallace ready. If you want that to be your answer or your option, whether that be halfway through the season or whether that be going into next season. So that's going to be an adjustment for everyone. But I think overall, as far as, quarterbacks and everything, it seems like status quo on that front. I know you said, Doug, that you didn't necessarily think that Drake May would be third. He thought he'd be second. But at this point, it's also just seemingly, the first day of OTAs, rookies are last on the depth chart. You still have to, quote unquote, earn your stripes for now. But, it's not a big secret, the fact that Drake May is the future and they want to develop him somewhere down the road. So, but yeah, I think the offensive line is just, the main thing for me.
Yeah, Mike, you mentioned the left tackle spot. They don't have somebody who has extensive pro experience at the position. And Chukes Okorafor, when he was asked about it, gave kind of the opposite answer of what we got from Caden Wallace when he was like, yeah, I've done it in practice. It's not really a big deal. It's just getting used to it. Chukes was gave the veteran answer. He was like, it's a new position, even though he did play it in college. I'm in a new playbook and offense. I'm in a new town, so I'm still getting used to everything. Which, I kind of like that answer. He's setting expectations so that nobody just thinks he's going to go out there and dominate at left tackle necessarily. But, we'll end up seeing when the pads actually come on what that looks like. For me, one of the surprising things, other than kind of the interior offensive line rotation, was the receivers, where we saw Tyquan Thornton was actually the starting X, and then you had KJ Osborne likely taking over for Kendrick Bourne as the Z, but it'll be interesting to see when he comes back, if he comes back anytime soon, what that rotation kind of looks like. And then Juju telling us he's 100%, can take him at his word. He was saying he was good last year, and look how that went. But, he said last year he was only 60%, but it didn't seem like he was part of the main rotation. You really saw, I think Kawan Baker actually was on the field before he was with some of those top groupings. So we'll see how that plays out. Again, guys who are already here probably getting priority, and Taekwon seems like someone they want to try to see what they have in him. He has speed they don't have anywhere else on the offense. He's on a rookie contract. So if he can just make the team as someone who plays like 15, 20 snaps a game max as a guy who really scares you on early downs going down the field, maybe that would be pretty nice. But, again, you get to see what the plan might be for certain guys. Antonio Mafi playing at center.
Yeah.
Didn't have that on my bingo card. That one really caught me off guard. But we do know they want to start cross-training guys. So hopefully he can carve out a niche as someone who can at least kind of back up a lot of different spots while they figure out what's going on in there. Because it doesn't seem like he's in the top plans. But without further ado, let's get into some of these mailbag questions. Starting with you, Doug. Based on what you've seen in OTAs and training camp, who's in the lead for the guard spot now that we know Strange will be out for most of the year? I will clarify, we don't know it's going to be most of the year necessarily. It sounds like it's probably going to be sometime in the middle of the season, which, again, with City So at left guard, it was like, yeah, he's probably not going to be available anytime soon if you're moving a guy who's going to be a starter into another starter's role.
Yeah, I did get a little bit more context on that just in talking to some people from the team. They really view Cole Strange and City So as being the incumbent starters at guard. They thought that So did enough last year at guard to want to move forward with him as another one of their starters. So it seems like he's a starter somewhere, though. I don't think they've fully figured out what side he's going to play. So that might be something that we see, over the next few weeks and months, him moving around a little bit. But it looked like, at least from the first OTAs, that Nick Leverett would be the next guy in line. Certainly would not be surprised if the Patriots gave Layden Robinson every opportunity to earn that other guard role, whether that was at left guard or right guard, however that shakes out. And then, Antonio Mafi could be in the mix there. Michael Jordan's potentially in the mix. Jake Andrews, if he could move over from center, which I think that the real top candidates that I view right now behind So and Strange would be Robinson, Leverett, and perhaps Mafi.
Yeah,
it's the same way.
It seems like even last year, when they drafted So and Andrews and Mafi, and then this year they go interior again, not only in free agency with Leverett, who you mentioned, but also drafting Layden Robinson. It was clear that they knew something was up with Cole Strange, and they had to plan ahead and now have 4 or 5 guys that they have at least some confidence in putting in that interior offensive line rotation. You mentioned too, Taylor, the cross training with Antonio Mafi. Not that we expect David Andrews to be gone anytime soon, especially now that he signed an extension through next season. But having that ability to kind of play all 3 spots, I think, will be crucial. And Leverett too, I think, is only a 1-year deal, so that's seemingly right. You plug him in, put So on the left, wait for Strange to get healthy, give him a chance. If he can't come back and he is, God forbid, expendable, right? And you get rid of him, then you have a guy like Layden Robinson who you can kind of bring in down the stretch of the season. So it's kind of definitely a work in progress for sure. But
yeah, you guys kind of nailed it. When Nick Leverett was signed, considering he has starting experience, played with Tom Brady and the Buccaneers, it is interesting because he was mostly a center and a left guard, and for the interior for the offensive line in general, those are the spots where you kind of have the most help. You see, obviously the center's usually giving somebody else help, and the left guard is someone who's usually going against nose tackles, so you don't really see them having the tough assignments. That right guard, with Shaq Mason, is the guy where you usually see them on an island. So especially watching his Buccaneers tape, it kind of reminds you that Tom Brady is ridiculous. He's getting the ball out so fast. I'm looking at, oh my God, this guy didn't give up a sack. His pressure rate is really low. He must be kind of a hidden gem. I do like his physicality in the run game. And even in reps against quality players, he did have flashes, but most of the time it's just oh yeah, these defensive linemen have no shot at getting anywhere near Brady. So that will be interesting. But it kind of leads interestingly into this question with the Cole Strange conversation. Regardless of Cole Strange's performance upon his return, is it safe to assume the Patriots will not pick up his 5th-year option after the season? What would you do? And the reason I think this is interesting is if you do have City So, if Layden Robinson establishes himself as a starter, David Andrews, yeah, he was extended, but he's probably not going to play more than 2 years. Maybe you keep the 5th-year option for Cole Strange and say, hey, put him in at center, see if there's anything there, because he's easily the best athlete on the entire offensive line. And then you look at Jake Andrews, maybe he comes along, but we really don't know. So do you guys think if he does, play well, but also you're in a situation where you want to play Layden, could they possibly pick up that 5th-year option and try him in a different spot?
Yeah, I mean, it's possible. Just like it's a lot of money to invest in someone that, just from who I was talking to the other day. Like I was talking to him about Cole Strange as well, and it's like, well, he wasn't very good as a rookie. He came on in his second year, but dealt with injuries to start the season, in the middle of the season, and then at the end of the season. And now one of those injuries is carrying on until his third season. So, like, I think he'd have to play really well over whatever it is, the last 3/4 to half of the season, for them to pick up that 5th-year option. Because I was trying to look up the 5th-year option projections for 2022. I like the lowest that he would be getting. I can't even, would be like, I don't know, like $15 million, something like that for a 5th-year option. It's just so much money. Yeah,
it is. It's
and that might not be accurate. I'll look more into it, but yeah, it's a lot.
It's too much for, like, I like the idea, Taylor, you mentioned of, just you slide him into center. He's an athlete. You can make it work. But for $15 million, as sort of a guess is tough, right? Like, again, unless he comes in when he's healthy this season, you try it out in practice. You think you can trust it. And then maybe he gets reps at some point, down the line in a game, depending on where David Andrews is, health-wise and whatever. But aside from that, I don't see them picking it up unless he comes in and kicks ass at the left guard spot this year. But like right now, looking at the question, regardless of the performance upon the return, he's not a candidate, in my opinion, to get the 5th-year option picked up whatsoever.
Yeah, I agree. Especially once the figure's out there. I literally got bad goosebumps. So it's like, okay, that's probably not a good idea. And in Strange's defense, I will say, he's played well at the end of both of his last 2 seasons. Obviously, he ended last season with an injury. But as a rookie, I really thought he started to pick it up. Like, he got benched, obviously, pretty briefly because he had a really tough stretch early to midseason. Then I felt like he started to gain some momentum. Got hurt, obviously. That kind of crushed his ability to really start building on it. But then mid to kind of late season before his injury, even Bill Belichick said, yeah, no, he's playing better. You look at the stats, his pressure rate allowed was lower. His run blocking grade was better. I only looked it up and I ended up wanting to ask Bill because I'm like, wait, he's looking like he's finally healthy. And I talked to him in the locker room. He said he was feeling like he was kind of getting some positive momentum, which again, it just sucks when a guy is doing well and then he gets derailed by injury. So I agree, Doug. I think he'd have to truly dominate if he were going to get that. And even still, if he does play well, that seems more like a situation where you give a guy like a prove it kind of deal, because it doesn't seem like anybody else is going to pay him the kind of money that he's not going to be able to come back to New England if they do want to give him a tryout at center.
Yeah, because that 5th-year option, like I wish I had looked it up before I gave the initial part of my answer. Like it's only broken down by offensive line. So like you're throwing in left tackles, right tackles, all those guys in there. So like he would literally have to be the best guard in football like whenever he plays this season for them to consider it. Otherwise, I think that, you either let him walk after the 4th year or try to sign him to a team-friendly extension, something like that. But I mean, he was also an older draft pick too. He's going to be 27 this year, 26, 27, which is kind of wild. Like, not to get on a tangent here, but when I was doing the Andrew Callahan's podcast, we were talking about Sidy Sow's age as well. Yeah. Sidy Sow is like basically the same age as Chukwuma Okorafor, despite the fact that Chukwuma Okorafor has been in the league since 2018. I think they're like less than a year apart. And the same thing for Cole Strange as well. Like some of these guys like Okorafor come into the league when they're 20 years old. And some of these guys recently with COVID and everything like that are coming in at 24, 25. And it's harder to sign them to longer term extensions once they get up to that age.
And I hate to beat a dead horse here, but I guess I will. It goes to show that first round pick on Cole Strange was just not the right decision. Right. And because again, one of the reasons why when you trade back into the first round, or even you trade out, but you stay or trade back rather, and you stay in the first round, is the potential for that 5th-year option. Right. But now, like you said, that 5th-year option is not just guard money, but tackle money. And so that all gets looped in. It's like, are we really going to want to do this for a guard? And, maybe back then they did, but right now it starts to look worse and worse by the day.
For sure, especially when the Chiefs picked Trent McDuffie with the pick that they traded down from. And I know there's people within the Patriots organization who are still not very pleased about that.
Oh, boy.
Right.
With the age thing, I just keep thinking back to the fact that it's kind of similar to how Kyle Duggar and Jabril Peppers. I think Duggar's older than Peppers, if not like very similar ages. And obviously Peppers was in the league way longer. I just keep thinking about that. That's pretty wild. Yeah, all right, last offensive line question. We had to start the show off with some real juicy stuff. What everybody's coming here for is the O-line stuff.
Does the
Patriots offensive line personnel fit the outside zone run scheme the probably going to be using this season. Anybody want to start, or do we want to defer the scheme back?
You can start with that one, Taylor, if you want to.
Taylor,
that's
this
right
is
up
your bread
alley.
and butter. Yeah,
I don't want to. I just always feel like a jerk when I throw that at people. But I will say, Mafi at center, it kind of makes more sense just because it's really the interior offensive linemen that pull a lot in this system. Now, with the outside zone, you also get like pin pull, where based on the alignment of the defense, different linemen are going to go out and get into space. You don't love Mafi in that role, especially if you're trying to get outside the way Van Pelt typically does when they run those kind of plays. But for the most part, I think they do. Leighton Robinson's kind of awkward because he's more of like a mauler and he's a little heavier footed, but he has really good length. He does have experience pulling and he's got good grip strength. So those kind of things I think can kind of make up for it a little bit. Cole Strange is obviously a perfect fit. That's why they drafted him, but he's not really going to be around. The rest of the guys like Chuks Okorafor, we see him on the field. He looks different than every other lineman they have. Like he looks like a jumbo tight end. So he's a good fit. Caden Wallace is a good fit. Mike Nwuenu's a good fit for tackle, I think. Like that's why there was talk about him at guard when Alex Van Pelt was signed, and I didn't think that made sense because you see like DeJuan Jones, he was really just kind of walling guys off. Sometimes if it was like crack toss, he'd pull out, and we've seen Mike Nwuenu do that. But really, I think in this system, he's okay as a right tackle, just kind of be a big body. Sometimes you'll do a combo and try to take over. I think he'll be fine in that regard. Sidney So, there's a reason they tried him at tackle last season. He is really athletic for a guard. And then David Andrews, I think, is just crafty enough. He's not a crazy athlete at this point in his career, but I think he is just good enough that he'll be able to do well in that scheme. And then Nick Leverett as well is more of he's super wide. You wouldn't really expect him to move as well as he does, but in that Tampa Bay scheme, you saw him pull a lot. So I think that it's still probably best suited for these guys to be going downhill. But at the same time, if you want your core to be outside zone and work that, knowing that, as they kind of talked about when we talked, I think it was in Nwuenu or Ramondre Stevenson, where it's harder to rep outside zone because it takes so much chemistry and timing and knowing how guys are going to play off different looks and different defensive alignments and things like that versus gap, where it's just like, yeah, you see that guy, put him in that guy's lap behind him and you're good. So I think it could be better fits, but I still think that they have enough tools that they can run it effectively.
Well, and the one thing I'll add to it, Taylor, we talked about this a couple weeks ago on here, I think with Phil when we did a mailbag, was that start out with it, see how, and again, when Van Pelt came in, started to implement the offense with the personnel they had, maybe outside zone was going to be the bread and butter, you want to call it. And then they sign the free agents, they go through the draft, and they think it'll work. And if it doesn't, just pivot. And it might not be that easy, but you don't necessarily have to just play to your scheme if your guys don't play to it. And then you end up trying to fit a square peg into a round hole. So it might not be their bread and butter if they don't like how it fits. But right now, everything you mentioned with the size and the way the guys move, I think it fits it. But if it doesn't work out, then you can just kind of pivot and make something else work.
They also have a lot of options on their roster right now. They've got 18 offensive linemen, which I'd have to look like historically, but it just seems like a really long list when I look at it right now. And it's also a lot of guys who are experienced too. I think of that 18, only 14 of them are rookies. So they can kind of work things out. This is the first practice that we saw in OTAs. The offensive line combination could look different. There could be someone else other than Nick Leverett in there moving forward here. But no, I think that as far as, it fitting the outside zone, they kept talking about it with Okorafor and Caden Wallace, like athleticism kept coming up when everyone was asking them if these guys can play left tackle. So clearly they were looking for a certain type at left tackle, even if it wasn't guys who are recently experienced in that position, they were still clearly looking for athleticism. And I even wonder, like, say Chuks dominates in training camp, preseason, whatever. Sidney So looks great, and they don't love one of the other guards on the roster. Like, there's still the potential that they could move Caden Wallace to guard for one season, and give him a shot in there as another one of the more athletic offensive linemen on this roster. That's not anything that I've necessarily heard, but I just look at that as being another option for them. The other option too is that, if Okorafor doesn't perform well, because as you were saying earlier, Taylor, he was really kind of tempering expectations for himself and for everyone else about him playing left tackle. I think some of that is just his personality that I was kind of picking up. But if he doesn't perform well, if Caden Wallace doesn't look comfortable at left tackle, there are actually still some options out there for left tackle. David Bakhtiari, I know that someone recently reported that he would be ready for the 2024 season. Charles Leno's still out there. Donovan Smith's still out there. So, the Patriots do still have kind of a trial period for some of these left tackles where if they don't look good, if they don't look like they're going to be ready, they still could have some options out there in free agency as well.
They don't have any of these guys really pinned into a position. I feel like they have just a bunch of offensive linemen they feel can play just about anywhere, which in theory is a great thing to have.
Yeah.
We just need to see it on the field first. And then if they truly have that versatility, then they can do pretty much anything they want.
For sure.
100%. And Doug, I like that you mentioned experience, because one thing when they were taking these guys, like we've seen over the past 2 seasons in the draft, they are looking for older prospects who played a lot.
Yeah.
I really think that's a philosophical thing, because with the CBA the way it is, where you don't have a lot of padded practices. I was literally just listening to Games with Names, and Cooper Kupp and Edelman were talking about how it's so much harder for offensive linemen to get things down. Cole Strange was telling me last season, everybody gives him a lot of crap about how he can't take on a bull rush. And he's like, yeah, well, I can't really simulate that. Like, he put on weight and he really did focus on it, but he's like, I can't. You need someone who's 300 plus pounds trying to move you backwards. Yeah. Like, his legs not going to do that for you. So I think, and we mentioned Chucho Okorafor mentioned with Scott Peters, we kind of asked about what he's like as a coach. He mentioned that Peters teaches technique more specifically and to a higher degree than he's seen at other stops, because obviously has experience, literally has a side hustle where he teaches technique. I think he wants somebody where it's like, this guy's seen a lot of football. He knows, if I have a shade, I do this. If I have a 3 technique, I tend to do this. And it's really just finding out what your specific coach and system want. And Scott Peters can articulate with them and show them how he wants it done. So I think that experience is huge for them, because if you're talking about moving around the offensive line, if you're talking about maybe having to pick things up a little more quickly, it's easier when you're a guy who's played a ton of football versus a guy like an Amarius Mims, where as much as I liked him and I had him on my big board, because I'm like, he's so talented. If he slips, I can't leave him off. But a guy like that, it could still be harder to teach him and kind of get him up to speed as quickly as you might want. So I like that note a lot, because if these guys do play, whatever experience they have is really going to come in handy. Yep. All right, we got a lot more questions, everybody. But first, quick word from our friends at PrizePicks. Be right back.
Get in on the playoff action and win up to 100 times your money on PrizePicks, as you and the world's best players take the game to a new level during basketball's postseason. You can win up to 100 times your money on PrizePicks with as little as 4 correct picks. You can turn $10 into $1,000 with basketball and hockey entries today on PrizePicks, America's #1 fantasy sports app. PrizePicks is the best way to get action on sports in more than 30 states across the country, including California, Texas, and Georgia. I personally love PrizePicks because they're super easy to use, easy to navigate, and they offer injury insurance, so your entries stay live even if one of your players gets injured. Quick withdrawals, easy gameplay, and an enormous selection of players and stat types are what make PrizePicks the #1 fantasy sports app. Download the app today and use the code CLNS for a first deposit match up to $100. That's code CLNS for a first deposit match up to $100. PrizePicks. Pick more, pick less. It's that easy.
We did get a comment in here on the offensive line. I know I said I'd move on, but this was actually a pretty good point.
Can't quit it, can you?
Wouldn't it make sense to always pick a tackle? At worst, you can switch him to guard. That's not a crazy philosophy. There are some teams for their interior offensive linemen, if they know they want them to move around a lot, they will take guys who were really college tackles who probably aren't great fits there in the pros and then move them to guard. So we don't have to go on for this one too long, but I'm curious what you guys think, because that is a good point. I think it's something that actually does happen.
I always think the same thing about cornerbacks moving to safety as well. I'm surprised that more teams don't do that, because, and obviously the Patriots had great success doing that with Devin McCourty. And like, realistically, your better athlete is going to be at cornerback than safety. And you see that every year at the combine as well. Like, cornerbacks are running like 4.3s, 4.4s. Safeties are usually running like 4.5s. A lot of times I would rather just take a cornerback late and try to move him to safety rather than gamble on a safety late in the draft.
It does feel
yeah,
right.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah.
It does feel very similar with, more athletic. You would think offensive linemen are your tackles. And then if it doesn't work because they can't adjust, I guess it's not easier to play guard. It's just different, but I guess we can maybe call it a little bit easier. And then you can adjust accordingly and go from there. So, I mean, in every situation, no, but, as a broad stroke draft philosophy, I don't necessarily hate that.
Yeah.
But we mentioned that. defense. Go ahead. No, go ahead first.
No, you're good. You're good.
No, I was going to bring up another question that was kind of similar to cornerback safety. So if you had something else before that.
Oh, yeah. No, go ahead. I was just going to say, Nightshade, thanks for showing love from Germany. That's really cool.
I did see that.
Very much. All right. Tell you, buddy.
We got this one, Old Man Mob. What is your biggest fear on defense? Because you mentioned cornerback and safety. I love the cornerback room. Safety, I'll answer it first. I don't think it's a concern because I love, what Duggar and Peppers do, but I still feel like they don't have that true free safety that we've had since McCourty was here. I know Marcellus Dial might be an option to, switch over there like we just mentioned from cornerback, but he's a rookie 6th round pick. Like I still feel like they're sort of missing that true back end of the defense, free safety. But I'm curious on what you guys think too here.
Yeah, I mean, I agree that they made it work last year, so I'm not overly concerned about it. You remove Adrian Phillips and Jalen Mills, like either one of those guys probably didn't necessarily need to be on the roster last year anyway. Right. But I do think that you need to see what Marte Mapu can do. And now's a good time to see it in OTAs, maybe the early part of training camp, because there are still some talented safeties out there that if the Patriots feel like they do need more depth at that position, there are some options out there. But yeah, I would say that biggest fear on defense, it's got to be in that secondary. Christian Gonzalez, great. Jonathan Jones, ultimate pro. Still don't totally know what Marcus Jones is, whether he's an outside guy, like a really small outside guy, a nickel. If he's a nickel, that means moving Jonathan or continuing to play Jonathan Jones outside. And then I like the options that they have as depth with guys like even like Alex Austin, Marcellus Dial, Isaiah Bolden showed something last year, but there's not a lot of guarantees in that cornerback room as even being like the 4th guy on the depth chart.
Even Marco Wilson is a guy who showed some promise, but it's not by any means a guarantee.
Right.
So
Sean Wade kind of in the same thing as Marco Wilson. Yeah.
When it comes to safety, if Marte Mapu comes along, I really like the room. Because I feel like the way they kind of work their packages, I do like Jabril Peppers as the free safety in most of them. I think when they use that big nickel where they usually put a safety in the slot, that's where I like Jabril Peppers near the line because that's where they blitz him and like Anthony Jennings. That's where a ton of their tackles for loss and run stops came from last season. But when they're in like their dime and you really are trying to get like Duggar and Mapu in the box where like Duggar maybe, or he's even like a lurk guy, kind of like Devin McCourty, you use Mapu as more of like maybe a man-to-man guy. I kind of like that. So if Mapu doesn't take the step forward, then I'm a little bit more concerned because there were times where Jalen Mills and even Miles Bryant seemed like they had to step up because Mapu, especially on the deep part of the field, really wasn't very consistent. But I would like to see him take on more of that deep safety role so Peppers can move around and then you don't need Duggar in the back end. Like we saw him take a snap there. I think it was like the first defensive snap in 11-on-11s. And I was like, did we not learn from last season? But we'll see how that works out.
Did you see the thing Peppers tweeted the other day when Cleveland played him like free safety, like a punt returner, and like he wasn't even close to the line of scrimmage? He was like, this is not where I play football, man.
Crazy. Yeah.
Dude, I remember studying him when he was with the Giants, and like they were putting him in man-to-man against Cooper Kupp. And I'm like, corners can't do this. What the hell is the thinking here? Like, he's doing it all, whatever. But, and like you guys mentioned, cornerback, love John Jones, love Gonzo. Marcus Jones, I honestly see as a bonus. If he's healthy, that's really cool. But for right now, he hasn't been able to stay on the field. He's been solid at times, but there's also inconsistencies. I do love the young competition they have. There's been talk about bringing in Stephon Gilmore as like a late summer call where you're like, hey, it's really not looking great at the other corner spot. We need you. If he's willing to play for a team in a rebuild, I'm all for it. But Alex Dawson's super talented. Marco Wilson's a pretty solid player. And Isaiah Bolden's another guy who we were all, I think, fairly high on just because he's so talented. Deion Sanders loved him. He played all over the secondary. I like him there. I would say, actually, the edge position kind of scares me. Like, you know what you're getting in Anthony Jennings. He's an elite run defender, not a great pass rusher, but that's all right. He can work on stunts. Judon's injury was an upper body, so I'm not as worried about his ability to rebound. But then it's Joshua Uche. We do know that he even said this scheme will probably play more to his strengths. If he can rebound, that's awesome. But then, like, Keon White is still an unknown, kind of like Marte Mapu. If he takes a step forward, then this position group looks a lot better. But we still don't really know what he is. And then O'Shane Jimenez, I think he's a solid player, but, you know, more of a rotational kind of, he can do it all, but you don't want him starting for you. So I don't think there's any glaring holes on this defense, and that's a really good spot to be in. But I think secondary and edge are definitely spots where you want to see young guys step up, and that really kind of determines what that position group is going to look like. Great question there. All right, now let's get to another one. Let's talk some wide receivers. Who do we see being the fourth man at that wide receiver spot? Honestly, I think we can kind of open this up to how do you see the depth chart going?
Yeah.
Kendrick Bourne, if he's healthy, probably pop. But then I don't really know who the third man is, much less the fourth.
Yeah, I think, you kind of have to determine who the first guy is almost before you determine who the fourth guy is. Because, as far as who's going to be the X on this team, I think it is interesting that Tyquan Thornton was the guy who was in that spot because it really feels like it's going to be one of the rookies. And it feels like it was probably only Tyquan Thornton because the Patriots did want to send, a message to their rookies that you guys are last on the depth chart, you're last in the reps, whatever it is. So I don't know. I mean, I think that ultimately what it's going to come down to is the wide receiver core is going to be, it all depends on Kendrick Bourne's health, but I would probably say one of the rookies, Demario Douglas and Kendrick Bourne. And then KJ Osborne can kind of be that super sub depth where I wouldn't have even minded if they had let Kendrick Bourne walk and only signed KJ Osborne, but at least with KJ Osborne in there, your entire wide receiver depth looks better. But it really does kind of depend on Bourne's health. But yeah, I would probably say Polk, Bourne, and Douglas, and then KJ Osborne would probably be the fourth, but I would still expect him to play a lot.
I agree. And I also wonder, Taylor, you've mentioned this a lot, and I feel like I pushed back on it a bit, but the more, after you bring in the rookies and I guess you think about the room more, I wonder how expendable KJ Osborne could be when it comes down to it, because he did only sign a 1-year deal. And, would that be, I don't want to call it harsh, where you bring him in and sign him and then he's gone, but it was only a 1-year deal. And if Javon Baker and Jalen Polk can really come on strong in training camp, and you feel like those can be day one contributors, and you feel comfortable about Kendrick Bourne's health and Tyquan Thornton plays well. Look, granted, there's a ton of factors, but I wonder how expendable Osborne could be when it comes down to cut down day. Same thing with Tyquan Thornton. Like you mentioned, he was the starting X receiver. That just feels like, okay, Kendrick Bourne's not an X, but Bourne's not healthy. The rookies aren't going to get in there. KJ Osborne's never been in the system. We haven't even talked about Juju Smith-Schuster. Where does he fall into this whole thing? So it's a bunch of question marks right now. But I would agree with Doug that I think one rookie ends up as the quote unquote starter. Kendrick Bourne if he's healthy, and then Demario Douglas in the slot.
Another thing about Thornton being the X that's interesting is that Jalen Reagor was really the starting X late last season.
Yeah.
It wasn't Tyquan. So that's even again, I feel like it shows that they want to try to give him some reps. But in terms of how this is going to work out, it does come down to Kendrick Bourne's health. I think he's better than KJ because we kind of forget, considering last year there were very few throws downfield. But when you look at 2021, remember Kendrick Bourne was making some crazy catches all the way downfield, and he fits in that vein of a Baker or a Polk, where Baker I think has a little more juice where he really can kind of separate downfield, but he's really just a ball winner where if you throw it up to him, he's probably going to get it. He may have lost some explosiveness, so I don't want to necessarily say he's a 3-level threat right now, but he does give you more if he's healthy than I think KJ Osborne. So kind of lump those two guys into one of them is probably going to get one of the starting roles. Then obviously pop in 3 receiver sets. And then it's okay. Jalen Polk, when you watch him block at Washington, that dude was a beast. The energy that he brings, I really don't see how you keep him off the field or away from the formation. Because one, he can take on those really difficult assignments. He's blocking linebackers, he's blocking defensive linemen. He's got safeties coming at him with a full head of steam. He's standing still, and he's like, bet, give me all you got. And he's locking him up it's crazy. And then he's letting him hear about it. That's the kind of thing where I don't know if you want to put him at X, because then it's all right, well, he's not really most plays he's not really going to be involved in the run fits. Then look at Javon Baker, where for me, I think he's the only true X where he can line up there the entire game and feel comfortable. They're going to move these guys around, but he's the only true separator, I think, outside of Pop Douglas in their receiver room. So if we are saying it's KJ Osborne / Kendrick Bourne, Pop, maybe they move it around based on the grouping, where on third downs, you get Javon out there because you need someone to beat man-to-man coverage. Early downs, you get Jalen Polk out there. But I think unless those young guys really just, it doesn't click for them, I don't see a world where we're going into December and they're not starters, or at least heavily in the rotation, where it's more like we want them to start, but they're not quite ready. So we're just trying to get the veterans in, knowing they're more reliable, while also giving these young guys opportunities.
So then what's your guys' prognosis on Juju? What happens there?
I don't know.
Because I don't know. And I
when he said he was 100%, it
it
threw a complete wrench in everything I've been thinking this offseason.
Yeah.
I actually still have him on the roster as the sixth guy, just because that's from conversation, but it's also, this is another thing I was talking to Andrew about, where like if you take, so the guys who are competing for that sixth spot on the wide receiver depth chart, like because I have the two rookies, Demario Douglas, Kendrick Bourne, and KJ Osborne on there. So you're talking about Kawan Baker, Kayshon Boutte, TJ Luther, Jalen Reagor, Juju Smith-Schuster, and Tyquan Thornton. I still think that Juju Smith-Schuster has the highest ceiling out of any of those guys, because we've actually seen him have a 1,400-yard season. We've actually seen him have a 900-yard season 2 years ago. We've never seen anything close to that from Tyquan Thornton or Jalen Reagor or Kayshon Boutte. So I don't know. I think that just as far as depth goes, veteran experience, he can play Z, he can play slot, probably not going to play a lot, but I just personally don't love the other options. I don't think Tyquan's going to be on the team this season unless he shows a lot this summer. I can't see it with Kayshon Boutte. Jalen Reagor, I think that his value kind of lessened this year too after the kickoff change rule, where like he might not be as good in that role. So, and he did nothing last year. Like Tyquan Thornton did nothing last year. I know that Juju didn't either, but at least he's done it before. And now at least it's a change in offense where maybe things click better for him in the new offense. And now that he's supposedly fully healthy.
And with Juju, if it weren't for the game he had against Pittsburgh, I would have no, like, there in no part of my mind would I think, oh yeah, maybe he's actually going to contribute, because we did see he made that really good contested catch downfield on an underthrown ball. He had a pretty nice play underneath where it's like, okay, maybe he can be that reliable guy. Where is he explosive as Reagor and Thornton? No, but at least, like you said, you know what you're going to get out of him. Then Thornton, again, he just brings a different level of speed. Then Reagor brings speed, and if return value, if they view him that way, like he still is back there returning kicks and punts. So we know he's at least in the mix there. But you also know what he is probably at this point. Like, how much better is Jalen Reagor going to get on his third team? And what is this going to be, his fifth season, fifth season, something like that? So, yeah, we definitely can't count Juju out, but that's one of my wait and see, because outside of the guys that we know are going to make the roster, it's just going to be guys who prove it and earn it in camp. All right, we do have some more questions, but first, quick word from our friends at Game Time. Be right back.
With the NBA playoffs in full swing and the Celtics looking like the best team in the East, I'm trying to go to a game so I can witness their greatness in person. And to get those tickets, I'm going to be using Game Time, an authorized ticket marketplace of the NBA, which makes getting playoff tickets even faster and easier. Prices on the Game Time app actually go down the closer it gets to the tip-off. With killer last-minute deals, all-in prices, views from your seat, and their lowest price guarantee, Game Time takes the guesswork out of buying NBA tickets. Buying tickets on Game Time is extremely easy. All you have to do is click on the team that you want to see, browse through the available options, then click on those games. Then you can go through filters like price, where you want your seat to be, all that good stuff. Click, get a panoramic view of the seat that you're going to buy, and it can be as easy as a one-click purchase for your ticket. Take the guesswork out of buying NBA tickets with Game Time. Download the Game Time app, create an account, and use code CLNS for $20 off your first purchase. Terms apply. Again, create an account and redeem code CLNS for $20 off. Download Game Time today. Last minute tickets, lowest price, guaranteed.
All right, now let's go to another skill position, running backs. Has Antonio Gibson purely been doing running back work to this point? Now, once again, it is very early. We saw one practice with the veterans. That said,
and I wasn't there, so I got no clue. This one's for you guys.
But I did catch a snap where we did see split backs with Ramondre Stevenson and Antonio Gibson in the backfield, like we saw last year with Zeke and Mondre. But in my opinion, Antonio Gibson is way more well-suited in that role. I already kind of figured they were going to use him in the backfield, in the slot, because he has that wide receiver background. But we saw a little glimpse of it. You know, maybe that'll expand as we go. But based on what we saw and what we know from him in terms of his profile and his career, I would expect him to be like outside in empty formations, a little bit of trickery in the slot. Like he's going to be more of a weapon, I think, than a pure running back for these guys.
Yeah, and I think that just early on, we're talking about all these wide receivers, and they have to figure out what they have in these guys, where they're going to play, like who's going to beat out who, everything like that. So I think that some of those formations with Antonio Gibson maybe splitting out or going the slot, whatever, those can kind of wait because he's done it in the past. He's not going to be doing it full time. So I wouldn't expect to see a lot of that this early on, but certainly a possibility, once they get to the season, of them moving Gibson around a little bit more.
And in general, in the room, they haven't really had that, that scat back, receiving back since James White retired a couple years ago. So even having that option is a plus. And, they're not going to really work that in, like you said, yet, because they still need to figure out the depth chart at wide receiver. But having someone out of the backfield who can be a dump off option, who, can actually get you 5, 6, 7 yards and maybe break one is key. So in general, like I really like that signing. I know that's not really the question, but since I didn't see it in person with you guys, in general, I like the fact that they brought in a receiving back to kind of get this thing rolling a little bit.
Yeah.
100%. I think he's going to be a very sneaky contributor. He's not really getting talked about, but I think he's someone who has the talent and the role that he fills to be really productive for them. Now, Doug, we were both standing watching these guys throw. So can Joe Milton actually throw a football over them mountains?
I guess it depends on the height of the mountain, but I wouldn't put it past him. Like the ball just comes out of his hand so fast. Like he just throws a fastball. He throws a line drive every single time that the ball is coming out of his hand. And like we were even probably saying, like, I feel bad for these guys who have to catch the passes during warmups because it's not wide receivers. It's not even like scouting assistants. It's like equipment interns who are catching these passes, and their hands are probably like bruised and battered after these practices catching passes from Joe Milton. Like I genuinely feel for them, but I don't know. I mean, like he's got probably the best arm, just pure arm strength that I've ever seen in a Patriots practice. Like the other guys who had crazy arm strength were like Ryan Mallett, obviously Tom Brady had good arm strength, but like Milton is just, it's crazy. His fastball is so fast. And now at this point, it's about harnessing it. But when you see him throw in practice, you can understand why the Patriots did use a 6th-round pick on him, because like it's worth seeing what you can do with someone who's that talented.
I just want to see him try and throw it over the lighthouse. Like you mentioned the mountains, but we actually have like a high peak in that stadium in Foxborough. Give that a shot, or have someone up there standing up there to try and catch it. I wonder if he could reach.
We got to talk to the social team and see if that's maybe a little segment they can do. So if they end up doing it, you heard it here first.
Yeah.
I mean, literally Tennessee's receivers had to wear gloves, like double up on their gloves because their hands were just raw from catching these passes. And, with Drake May, I think when you talked about his arm strength, sometimes you hear that like it's really good, but it's not like elite necessarily. And that's no discredit to him, because like this guy can be rolling out and throw a ball with touch and accuracy, like 50, 60 yards down the field. He's like A arm strength. Joe Milton shows you what an A+ looks like. Okay. Like that's Josh Allen, that's Justin Herbert, that's Matthew Stafford, where it's just like, oh my God. Like I kind of put it as like Drake May is superhuman, but those guys are just fallen aliens. They are not of this world. So can he throw it over the mountains? We'll talk to the social team. We'll see if we can get something going there. All right, let's wrap this one up. How weird is it covering the team now that they aren't operating like the mafia? Now, typically, I kind of just take these as a joke. The reason I put it up is because Juju Smith-Schuster did have an interesting comment. When he was leaving the field after practice, he'd already wrapped up his availability, was walking away, and then turned back to us and made a note saying the vibes in the locker room are way better. Now, obviously, we know there's like a basketball hoop in there. There was a video of Mike and Winnie riding a bike around. Like, that was a little crazy. I think the basketball hoop I kind of like, honestly, as long as you're keeping the main thing, and really just trying to like get some competition, obviously. Like, you really want that to be in every room in the facility, that kind of thing I'm cool with. But, I mean, it definitely seems different. Everybody that we've spoken to, like, from people on the staff, the players, there's very clearly a different vibe in the building. So,
and Keon White mentioned too that, there's not like, I forget if he said, and I wasn't there, but I read it, like less of a hard ass vibe, and that he kind of misses being chewed out by Bill Belichick a little bit. So like, yeah, I mean, they're talking more. Keon White barely spoke last season, and for him to come out and say that on day one, it goes to show that they're more free. They feel more, inclined to speak with the media, and things have Like I remember just the other day at rookie minicamp, we were kind of just able to walk out on the field and there was no escorts. And it didn't feel like you were going through, a government building. It felt like you were just going to cover a football team. And so, look, does it matter? Who knows? Because if they don't win games, then it's going to be gone in, a year or two, and it's going to be back to something else. So sometimes it makes our jobs easier, but in general, it's good to see that there are some better vibes.
Yeah,
the vibes. Oh, my bad. I'm sorry.
Oh, sorry. I was just gonna say that the vibes were even considerably different at like the NFL scouting combine. You just saw way more Patriots people out and about than you would have in years past because of the shift from Bill Belichick to Gerard Mayo. I mean, Gerard Mayo is very different from Bill Belichick just as a head coach, like chopping up with people and everything like that. It's even like it's different in that there's quotes from Gerard Mayo coming out from like Albert Breer or NFL Media when like you might not necessarily expect him to be coming out. Suddenly like there's a Gerard Mayo quote that you don't know where it's coming from. Like that never happened with Bill Belichick. Bill Belichick didn't talk to like anyone on the record outside of a press conference. So it's certainly a lot different. And like you said, Mike, like we don't know if this is a good thing. We'll find out, but it is a lot different. And there's certainly an aspect of it making our jobs easier in that respect.
I was just going to say to the Keon White point, that joke around Twitter where it's like, who are two people that match each other's freak? I guess that's Belichick and Keon White, just a couple of hardos who really like the grind. And that's a good point. We have no idea how this is going to look, how it's going to turn out. There's optimism because when you look at a lot of the successful teams, like the Rams are probably the best kind of comparison where when you do give players more ownership and you treat them like, more peers than like your subordinates, like in the militaristic system, it can work. But Sean McVay's not just anybody. Like he puts in a ton of work. Again, I'm watching Games with Names, and Cooper Kupp is talking about how, or one of the producers on the show is talking about how McVay will literally watch his own speeches to the team and like break himself down. So like, you do have to be different for that kind of thing to work. It's not just like, oh, let's just have fun. It's a game. It's like, no, it's still very much a professional job. Yeah. It just gets to the point where when you're winning, everything's fine. But when you're losing and only the defense is good, then it's kind of hard for the whole team to buy into the whole thing where it's like, all right, I know I'm busting my ass here, but like we're not putting up any points. So something's not exactly jiving. But again, it's going to be one of those things. Time will ultimately tell. Do we have anything in the comments before we head out of here?
Rosemary Jetty in here, actually, this was something I've been thinking about a little bit, is that like if things weren't going well in practice, Patriots players knew that Bill Belichick was going to be reaming them out in the meetings afterwards, or they'd all huddle together and he'd be cursing them out, like Keon White said. I am curious to see how that goes this year, whether it's going to be like if Gerard Mayo is going to be maybe more of a hard ass in those instances, or if they have to rely on some of the veteran players, because as far as like veteran players on this roster, David Andrews is certainly someone who could do that. Jabril Peppers is someone who could possibly do that. But otherwise there's not a lot of those typical super respected veteran leaders on this team. So I am curious to see how that happens when practices aren't going well, because there's going to be practices this summer that are not going to go well. And I think the team is going to have to be reminded by someone that it's unacceptable.
Taylor, the other day when we were there, I think it was you, it was rookie minicamp, and there was a false start, and they just reset the play. And Taylor looks at me, he's like, no lap? Like they didn't have to do a lap? Last year when
I think it happened. I think it happened in OTAs too. There was a false start or an offsides, and nothing happened. So I'm like, I don't know if so Gerard Mayo was a player. So that part of me is like, do the players just think it's stupid? Like it doesn't actually help. It's just kind of a thing that you do because you're kind of stuck in your ways. So I'm curious to see how that goes. And with Mayo, like he does come from a family with a military background. Like he was a captain on this team. He was close with Bill. So I cannot emphasize enough. We need to see how this plays out. But for someone like him, who was not only just a player under Bill, but a leader, both as a player and a coach, you hope he's maybe just kind of siphoning out, okay, these are the things that really did instill discipline. And I don't think anybody's acting like Gerard Mayo's this softy or anything. Like he's been in charge of the defense. Like obviously Steve was doing a lot as well, but when it came to meetings, like he was running the show and the defense has been fine. So you would think that he's still going to do what needs to be done and maybe cut out some of the things that weren't quite necessary from a player perspective and then adapt as things go on, maybe, tighten up if he needs to. But it is interesting because, again, we literally have already seen an example where they commit a penalty that was just a heinous mistake under Bill Belichick. And he's just like, all right, keep it moving. And then rookie minicamp, it was different because it's like, all right, this may not be productive. Half these guys aren't even going to be here in a week.
They don't know the cadence yet. This isn't like something that they're used to all the time, stuff like that for sure.
Yeah, I feel like OT or a training camp will really show us like, okay, was this just a thing where they're trying to get everybody on the same page and it's a lot of new stuff, or are we really going to see that maybe they should start tightening things up? But to be determined once again. All right, fellas, great time. Thank you, Doug, so much for joining us. Please let the people know before we sign off where they can find you and what great stuff you got coming down the pipeline.
Absolutely, yeah. You can follow me at Doug Kyed. Keep it on BostonHerald.com for all my coverage, for all of Andrew's coverage. We're going to have all of your normal OTAs, mini camp, Tom Brady. I'm even covering a Celtics game tomorrow, so that'll be fun. I'll be in the building for that. But, just follow me at Doug Kyed and BostonHerald.com. Those are the main places.
Awesome. Mike, you got anything dropping?
New episode of Behind the Mic Pod dropping at
go.
6 o'clock in 10 minutes with Doug Kyed from the Boston Herald. So if you're watching on Twitter, you can stay here and we'll have another live stream coming up in about 10 minutes. So besides that, helping out with Taylor on some Patriots coverage for CLNS and Celtics stuff too. So follow on Twitter at Mike Kadlick for all that stuff.
That was a beautiful coincidence that
Doug ended up
it
really was.
That was perfect. And for me, just look out. I've been watching a lot of Jalen Polk film. There's been some other stuff, so it took me a while to get it out, but I am going to be posting a breakdown of why he could be a really versatile weapon for the Patriots. I've done one on Drake May. I've done one on Javon Baker. So that's going to be a fun deep dive into what we can expect from him. Thank you all for watching. As always, in the meantime, till I see you again, take care of yourselves. Take care of each other. We'll see you next time. Peace, y'all.